Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ian Bates. I work in the marketing department for Milner Browne. Today's presentation is an introduction to SAP Business One for manufacturing. Joining myself is Clive Black, who is one of our senior SAP Business One consultants. Clive will be giving you a live demonstration of the software and just showcasing all of the tools in SAP Business One shortly. Okay then, guys. Firstly, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I'll just give a quick overview about Clive. So Clive, as I discussed a few moments ago, he's one of the senior consultants at Milner Browne, and he specialises in manufacturing and material control. So he's been working specifically for Milner Browne for the past 15 years, implementing a number of SAP Business One solutions across the United Kingdom. And he's also got various specialities such as complex capital equipment, simple assembly and simple process. Okay, so before we get going into the main part of the presentation, just a quick note about any questions. We welcome any sort of interactions and any sort of questions that you may have. Now, if you notice on your toolbar on your GoToMeeting panel, there should be a questions tab, and if you send any questions through there at the end of the presentation, I will pass these on to Clive and he will happily help out with any sort of questions that you may have. Okay, so a quick introduction about Milner Browne. So Milner Browne actually implemented the first SAP Business One solution in the UK. Since then, we've implemented 400 successful projects in the last 10 years. We are an SAP Gold partner and one of Europe's leading SAP Business One partners as well. We focus exclusively on SAP Business One, so unlike other providers that you may have some sort of interaction with, we don't implement any other software apart from SAP Business One and obviously our own innovation as well. Just going on to that, so we've developed 20 add-ons as part of the B1 apps range. So this lets you customize your solution. Obviously we think that SAP Business One is great, but over the years that we've been working with SAP, we've had various requests from certain customers about how they would like to extend or to customize the solution, and that's what we've done in the B1 apps range. And we have also won various awards for our customer service and support. Okay, so SAP Business One, it's the world's most popular ERP solution. 50,000 companies use the solution across the world, and that's an average of 750,000 daily users. Within the software, there's tools to manage every aspect of your business, so there's no need to use disparate solutions for finance or production, that kind of thing. It's been designed specifically for SMEs. There's various versions of SAP Business One now, and on every new version there's new tools which have been developed in partnership with small businesses around the sort of requirements that they need on a daily basis. And like I mentioned a moment ago, you can customize your solution as part of with the Milner Browne B1 apps range. Okay, so what's included in SAP Business One? So as I discussed a moment ago, there's various modules in the solution that help you manage every aspect and area of your business. So accounting and finance, sales, CRM, purchasing, operations, the stock control, reporting and admin, HR features, there's tools for service accounts, and much more, which Clive will go through in a moment. Okay, and just on the purchasing and operations, so you can automate and manage this process automatically in SAP Business One, so things like purchase requests, purchase orders, goods in receipts, etc., those kind of things. You can easily view balances, you can do analysis on your purchasing, price lists, task information, etc. Sync your real-time goods receipts in with your warehouse levels and your inventory, and obviously there's the important reports which give you instant snapshots into company-wide activity and performance. And importantly for manufacturing companies, there is the production and Mrp module, which obviously Clive will go through in a bit more detail, where you can effectively plan and manage your production line. Okay, so the business benefits of SAP Business One then, we think that they're quite wide-ranging and they're obviously different for certain SMEs and Benefits include accurate and predictable delivery times, reliable order margins, reduced planning and time, etc., improved responsiveness, reduced lead times, and ultimately all those kind of things lead to increased customer satisfaction. Okay, so I'm just going to pass over to Clive now, and he will give you a live demonstration of the software.
Hi everybody. Okay, what I'll do is, by way of an introduction, as probably a lot of you have never actually seen Business One, never mind what it actually does. I'll go through, for the first couple of minutes, I'll go through some fairly general aspects about how the software itself is actually put together and the sort of facilities you've got out of the box for customizing it. But as you can probably see, there's a menu system, and the menu system really covers all the actual modules within Business One itself. Now, I'll concentrate on the materials and manufacturing aspects. So the ones I'll concentrate on mainly are things like purchasing, stock management, resources, production, and MRP. Okay, but by way of a sort of introduction, the whole system is controlled through an administration module. That covers all the sort of general settings for all parts of the system itself. So this is where I can set up a whole series of parameters about how I actually want to run the software, what functionality I want to expose the users to, and how I want to do certain things. So for example, a good example of it is stock. So if I pick up the stock parameters, I can have serial number tracking, batch number tracking, I can set various default warehouse, I can set how the warehousing and stock system integrate with the general ledger, and again, what parts I'm actually using. So the general settings really range through all the business partners, the stock, production, also a thing called the cockpit, which is really the dashboard side of things, because there's a lot of KPIs come out in graphical format, really out of the box. But again, with SAP, you can custom design your own cockpits for your own use. Now, if I go back to the administration module, it also covers things like authorizations. So every user's got a user code. When I select a user, I can then dictate what authorizations he's got to go. So if, for example, Kristen is not allowed into financials, I can change the full authorization to no authorization. And basically that prevents two things. It stops them getting into any of the financial modules, but it also can be used to tailor the menus. So rather than seeing every single module that's exposed in Business One, the Kristen will only see the options that he's actually allowed into. So it ranges through things like, if I go to say something like production, okay, I've got whether or not, it can, for example, change that to read only. So it means that he's only allowed to read bills of material, so he can view bills of material, but he can't actually change them. And that's a fairly common sort of thing if you've got an engineering department who are responsible for looking after bills of material. People on the shop floor may want to do inquiries on bills of material, but you won't necessarily want them to change them. Okay, so this is really all set up when the system's actually created and configured, so that each individual user's got their own aspects and their own parts of the system they're allowed into. And obviously, to make things, slightly quicker, you can copy authorizations from one user to another just by using the copy option. Okay, so I'll cancel out that. So the whole administration module sets up all the basic configuration of the system. You also have things like data ownership, so you can prevent, for example, people that are attached to one particular branch, you can stop them looking at another branch's documentation. So a lot of this initial configuration is done before you actually implement the system. Now, as Business One is all modular, along the top here, you've got the normal sort of Windows style thing. So if I go into a production and I go to a production order and I pick up, say, the first production order, I can use preview and that will show me the layout of the shop documentation. You can also print directly from Business One. You can email directly from Business One. You can also send SMS messages, which means you can ring a mobile phone if you get an order that's worth more than £10,000, all this sort of thing. You got this, both the SMS and the fax need an extra piece of third-party software, but WinFax, for example, is a sort of standard for doing faxing. Now, anywhere you've got a screen, whether it's a screen as an inquiry screen, a display screen, or a self-generated query, you can get the option there to directly export that to Excel, and that will take the contents of the screen and put it straight into Excel. You can also do the same for PDF documents. So I can take that report and create a PDF from it and email that to somebody else. Okay, along the sort of, I'll not go through every single icon, but basically whenever you're in any screen in SAP, you can change that from an add screen, which is to create a new record, to a find screen. So if I pick, for example, a product number, I can look up a series of products, choose that, and then find any production order for that. Okay, now the find screens, basically if I change that data from an add to a find, anything that's in yellow here is a find screen. So things like item masters and so on, you can actually find through addresses, sorry, not addresses, descriptions, the item type, the item group, virtually any field in SAP which you can display, you can also search on it. And it's full string search, so if I use an asterisk, 3 letters, an asterisk, I'll get a string search on those 3 characters. I can search from left to right, and as I say, I can do full string searches. So the searching and finding is very, very sophisticated. Okay, again, moving on that, you've always got the option to do things like first record, previous record, next record, and last record. So if I click on last record, that will give me the last production order. I can page one back from that. Now this is quite useful if you've got a lot of documents for the same item, a lot of production orders. You can move backwards and forwards between them. These ones that are grayed out are doing calculations and so on. The other thing with SAP is that all the documentation is flexible. So I can take a production order, for example, and if I go into manage layout, that will actually bring out a layout screen which will allow me to go in and customize the documents. Now SAP's got 2 basic ways of doing it. You've got a thing called the print layout designer, which is a standard facility which comes out of the box. If you don't want to use that, SAP's all now fully integrated with Crystal reports. So you can also use Crystal reports to create documentation. So things like external documents, dispatch notes, statements, invoices, that sort of thing, they can all be produced in Crystal and imported into SAP. Okay, this is taking a while to fire up. So now both Crystal and the print layout designer, they work along similar sort of lines. You can customize the actual layout. You can add fields to the layout. So any field that appears in SAP in any part of the database can basically, provided as a logical link, can be added onto a document. So you've got facilities for things like standard paragraphs. So if you've got terms and conditions you want to put on a purchase order, you can actually add that as a standard paragraph and put that onto the document. Usual demonstration style, something's gone wrong. Okay, I'll just fire it back up again. Okay, with common law systems, you need a user code and password to get on, and the normal practice is that the user code and the password are actually changed on a fairly regular basis. You can also link the user code and password to your Windows user code and password. So basically your user code and password to actually get into SAP would be the same as the normal Windows user code and password. Now this is actually firing up one of our internal add-ons, which is an adjunct to production and various other things. What I'll do is once it's started, I'll actually stop it again, because what I'm going to show you today is really basic standard SAP, which comes out of the box as opposed to having any add-ons running with it. So once that's started, I'll just stop it again, so we go back to the standard system. Right, so that should have stopped the add-on. So I left off on some of the icons on the top here. Now, if I go into any particular screen, if I take something like a stock, the basic starting point for production material control is really stock management. So everything has an item master. And the sort of information that's held in an item master is really the basic stock information, planning information, and manufacturing information. So if I pick a very typical item master for a top level item, okay, what I've got is the item itself, the description, the item type, the item group, units of measure, any price list that's attached to. But I can also have in SAP a system of warehouses. So if I've got a number of different locations, I can actually set these up as warehouses. Within a warehouse, you've also got a full stock location system now. So in addition to just having the total quantity of that item in a warehouse, I can set up stock locations and actually create stock physically in the warehouse in rows, aisles, levels and openings. So you've got up to 4 levels of a stock location control. From a manufacturing point of view, the planning data is quite important. That dictates whether an item is MRP controlled, how it's procured, whether it's made, which means manufactured, or whether it's purchased, which means it's bought in from an outside supplier. These flags, like things like make and buy, there is nothing in SAP. If you have an item which you normally manufacture, but you want to buy it from an external supplier because you're short of supply or short of capacity, these can be overridden at the point you raise the purchase order. So although they're a guide as to how the item's normally sourced, you can override it. You've also got basic stock information of the warehouse detail. I've got production information, which holds how do we actually manufacture it, how do we issue it, is it a phantom item, and what is the bill of material type. Now you can have different types of bill of material, and I don't really have time to go into them today, but you've got things like sales bills of material, assembly bills of material, or straightforward production bills of material. Now one of the other things with SAP is that the actual item master, for example, you can also have a series of what we call user-defined fields against it. Now a user-defined field is something that a user can actually add to the database. So although you've got a whole wealth of information against an item master, if you want to add something additional to that, you can use that through the customizing screens. So in tools and customizing, user-defined fields, virtually every table in the standard system allows you to go in and create additional fields against it. So that applies to things like marketing documents, because in SAP a marketing document is a quotation, a sales order, a dispatch note, a sales invoice, a purchase order, and so on. So these are the sort of user-defined fields that we've created just against the individual documents. Okay, if you're in a screen like, for example, the item master, there's another customization tool which allows me to edit the form. Okay, now what the edit the form does, it allows me to move information from one tab to another. I can change the size of tabs, I can change the titles, I can move these around, so I can redesign the screens as much as I want. So it just means you've got a fair amount of flexibility in how the screens appear to individual users. And the other thing is that when we look at the item master and we look at the user-defined fields, the user-defined fields, as I said earlier, can be put on any documentation you want. They can also be used in the report generator to report on user-defined fields. So if, for example, there's an analysis key in production that you want to add that isn't a standard one, you can add that as a user-defined field and the report generator will still use that. Okay, so as I say, I'm not going to spend too long on the generalities, but basically that's all covered in the standard out-of-the-box software. You've also got other facilities like alerts and so on. Now alerts really work with a messaging system, so you can have document approvals, you can have any kind of exceptional set of circumstances in the database, you can generate a query for it. This will generate an incoming message, and you can, by changing the configuration of the alert, you know, the alert can be generated, it can be emailed, it can be used in an internal messaging system, or it can be fired out through an email system. So if you want to alert somebody to something, they don't necessarily have to have a SAP user license. You can set them up as a user without a license with an email address, and it will automatically email that address to their email. Okay, right, but coming back to sort of material control in manufacturing, basically the starting point is the item master data which have been in. You also have a whole series of stock transactions for stock. So if I look at that, you've got the straightforward things like goods receipts and goods issues, stock transfers between locations. I've got stock counting, I've got stock opening balances, I've got cycle count recommendations, I can revalue stock at any point in time, and the whole stock system and material system is all linked directly to the general ledger. So if I do a goods issue, it'll credit the stock account. If I do a goods receipt, it'll debit the stock account, and so on. But by and large, these stock transactions are not really used because everything in SAP is a result of doing something else. So if, for example, I go into something like purchasing, and I'm going to create, I can create purchase blankets agreements. This is where it's a call-off style agreement. I've agreed to buy 50,000 a year, and I'll buy them at the rate of 5,000 a month, but each month I'll have an individual call-off. I can have purchase quotations or a purchase request. Now, a purchase request is really a request for a quotation. So I can send out a request for a quotation to a number of different suppliers. When I get the results back, I can pick one of these up as the preferred supplier, and I can raise that purchase request as a quote, and then from a quote I can raise that as a purchase order. Okay, but within things like purchase ordering, again, I talked about the finds and selects, but I can just pick a supplier off the list. I need the posting date, I need the date I'll actually want that supplied. I would pick the item number, and again, either by doing a search on here to find the item, or by keying a number directly in, or picking it from a list. I pick up the item number, I pick up the quantity, which might be 20, and that gives me the unit price. I've already got a delivery date, so if I just add that, that will automatically give it a number, which is 439. So if I add that, okay, that's the order. Now if I go to the last record, there's my 439. Now everything in SAP works on a document flow. So if I find that purchase order, I can copy that from there to a goods receipt. And what that'll do is copy the purchase order. If I've only received 19 and not 20, I can change the receipt quantity. I can add that. Now what this is doing is automatically giving me stock locations to actually put the stock into. Well, that's telling me we don't actually have enough capacity to add that. So what I'll do is I'll select a different bin. So if I just use the drop down, that's all the locations I've got in that warehouse, so I'll choose that one. I'll say I want to allocate the 19. Okay, what that's done is basically put the item into stock, put it into a stock location, and it's quite common for the first stock location to be a QA slot, and then you use a stock transfer once it's inspected. But going on this idea of a document flow, if I then go to the last GRN, which is 437, which is the 19 for that, I can then copy that directly. An invoice. I can also copy the return. If I do inspect it and there's something wrong with it, I can copy it to a goods return. And I'll just add that. That basically adds the purchase invoice, updates the supplier record, and updates the last purchase price on the item. So that's me got that goods receipt there. Now, if I, up here, I've got base document and target document. So if I go to that goods receipt and I go base document, that will take me back to the original purchase order. If I go target document again, it will take me back to the goods receipt. And if I go target document again, that will take me to the invoice. So if I've got a query on an invoice that's coming from a supplier, I can go from that back via the GRN and back to the original purchase order to see what the price was in the purchase order. Now again, just by a sort of general thing, there's a settings tab here. Now this is just another method of being able to change the screens themselves. So if I want to see the description, I can make it active and I can make it visible. If I OK that, what I'll find is the screen's now changed and it'll include the description. If I want to take the BP catalogue number off, put back into settings, table format, and I can hide the BP catalogue number and that will disappear. If I want to move something, I can actually just highlight the field and drag it up, okay, and that will move the order on the screen as well. Okay, so now I've got the item number, the item description and the quantity. If I increase the size of the screen settings like that are stored in a user profile in the database. And what that means is next time I go into that screen, I'll get the same thing, screen layouts on a screen. Okay, I left off really looking at resource master data because the resource is really where you set up the machines and the machine groups and so on. Now you can set up, as I say, general detail against it. The issue method is on any resource and on any material. You can either manually issue it. Now when it says manually issue, what it means is that if you've got a resource, you need to effectively tell SAP how much of that resource is used. So if your standard operation time was an hour and you used an hour and a half, you basically have to issue an hour and a half to that production order. And that in turn will work out an adverse variance in the costing system. If you make it backflushed for either material or resources, as soon as you manufacture the next level up, whether it's a subassembly or the top level, it'll assume that for the quantity you've manufactured, it's used the right amount of material and the right amount of resource. So basically if you set everything to backflushed, it means that you will always issue exactly the right amount of stock automatically, but you've also got the option to overissue. So if you're backflushing but you've overused material, you can issue the excess. Okay, so that's the capacity data set up. So that's the amount that you've got allocated, what's committed and what's available. You've got the planning data. Now this is done in minutes. So that's why these, if you like, they've got Monday to Thursday are straightforward 8-hour days, so it's 8 times 60. So the capacity is 420 minutes a day. Friday is a short day, so you've only got 5 hours, so that's 300. You've got daily capacity factors. This is a method of being able to handle multiple resources. So I've got a resource up there, A3. If A3 is a machine, a drilling machine, for example, but I've got 3 of them, I can build that into the factors. So rather than trying to schedule one individual machine or have each individual machine on the bill of material, I can put them on as a group and then I can put in a factor for the capacity. So I've got 4 machines in the group, they're all identical, so basically I've got 4 times the amount of capacity of one machine. You've also got the option to say link resources and machines to the fixed asset master. So this is where if you actually use the SAP financials, there's a fixed asset module and that machine can then be designated a fixed asset. And obviously you can depreciate the fixed assets, you can add to the fixed assets and so on. And it will do all the depreciation postings automatically. So I've cancelled out that. So that's the resource master. You've got the actual capacity. Now I can look at a capacity window, I can look at that machine, I can look at the capacity type, so I can say all, I can say committed, right, and that will give me all the resources from that resource onwards. That gives me the week numbers. The 9th and the 10th are Saturday and Sunday, so they're designated in the calendar as non-working days. If I look at then the load on there, for example, I double click on that, that will give me the actual production orders that are creating a load. And if I go from the source, that's the production order number. So I can go down from the production order to the actual production order. It's a standard order, the status is planned, that's what I'm manufacturing, that's the planned quantity, there's my base quantity, and then that times 144 gives me a planned quantity. What I've issued so far, what's available, and again on the gold arrow there, that will take me back to the planning capacity data. Okay, so that basically allows me to look at the capacity details that are loaded in against any particular resource group. Okay, so once I've set up the resources, the bills of material, I'm really into mainstream production where I can set up a production order, and if I go to, I'll just go to the last production order, and I'll go to one that's got a bit more detail on it. Right, that for example there, that's the type of standard. Now, when you set a production order up, you can have standard production orders, which are basically taking the bill of material and manufacturing the finished product. You can have disassembly production orders. That's where you can take a machine to bits, for example, and put it back into stock. You've also got special production orders. Now, a special production order allows me to manufacture the top level item without reference to the standard bill of material. So where you can use that is, for example, if you've got a machine, for example, in stock, and what you want to do is change the configuration for another customer. So rather than manufacture a new machine from scratch, you take a machine out of stock, you can use a special production order to take parts off it and to add parts to it to manufacture the top level. So you're not referencing the standard bill of material at all. Okay, you've also got on bills of material, for example, the special production order is quite a good example where you take the machine out of stock, you take, say, a feeder or something off the machine and you put a different feeder on. What you can then do on the special production order has in the special production order itself is you change the allocations so the raw material is the machine that's coming out of stock. What's added to that is the new feeder, and what comes off that is a byproduct, which is the old feeder. And the way you designate a byproduct is having a negative quantity in the allocation. So that's how you can basically handle items that have been manufactured stock and then you want to modify them. Okay. And again, on a production order, you've got a receipt from production, which is basically booking finished material in from an order number. You've also got an issue for production, which is picking an order number and actually issuing the material to it. Okay, so that really is the receipts and issues. You've also got all this links to a module called the Mrp module. Now, most of you have run Mrp before will know basically it's a fairly straightforward Mrp module. You can either, there's a thing called the Mrp wizard. Now in SAP, in a lot of places, you can use a wizard to actually generate a particular run. So on this Mrp wizard, I can create a new scenario or use an existing scenario. Now the idea of a scenario is a set of parameters that I set up in the background. So every time I run Mrp, I might just change the dates on it, but it's going to, all these other settings are going to be the same. So on Mrp, this scenario is Mrp Inventory. I've got a start date and an end date. I want to look at it weekly. That's 4 weeks. So basically I have 4 weeks worth when I actually look at the recommendations. If I go next on it, I can add selected items or add all items. I can go next on that again. I can select supply warehouses or deselect them, or I can run by warehouse. So if I've got 2 locations, Manchester and Birmingham, I could run an Mrp for Manchester with Manchester sales orders, Manchester purchase orders, Manchester stock, and Manchester production orders, and I could run a separate Mrp altogether for Birmingham. I've then got all these things like sources of demand and supply, so I can include as supply purchase orders, blanket purchase orders. As demand could be sales orders, blanket sales orders, production orders. I can have stock transfer requests. Now again, if I am running Mrp by location, so I'll run an Mrp for Birmingham and I run an Mrp for Manchester. If somebody in Manchester is looking for something and it's in stock in Birmingham, they can raise a stock transfer request, and that stock transfer request will actually be picked up by the Mrp system for Birmingham as a source of demand. And then you can also restrict certain documents. So if I want to restrict certain sales orders, I can do that. Certain production orders, I can do that. So if I leave these blank, select these, and I go run on it again, what that will actually do is it will run the Mrp system. Okay, so if I just expand that screen, so what I've got is not very many items on here, but if I take that item, for example, on the inquiry screen, I can say, well, what's my initial stock? There's nothing. I've got a supply of 13. If I double click on that, that tells me there's a production order that's got no source, so that'll be a recommended production order to raise. That's an existing production order for 7, so I add the 2 together, that's 13. So there's my demand for, supply for 13, and that's coming from 2 sales orders, 1 for 6 and 1 for 7. Okay. Where I've got an item highlighted, it means that basically I've got a problem in terms of the final stock and what I've got in stock, so there's a problem in that. But once you've run Mrp, provided the figures look sensible, if I go to the recommendations, what that does is that gives me what it's actually recommending. So that, for example, was that works order for 6. So it's recommending I create a new one. Now if I do, if I shift out of the way, if I do a save recommendations, that will overwrite anything that's still there. So I say yes to continue, and I just go finish. Then if I go to order recommendations itself, what I've got is the order type. So I can say I want production orders only, I want purchase orders, I want stock transfer requests, quotations or purchase requests. So I just say all. I'm not going to select anything in here, but if I say OK to that, that gives me a list of all the recommendations. So for example, there's that item there. If it's a buy recommendation, I can add a supplier code, but normally on that item you would have a preferred supplier and that will come up automatically. They'll also have a price, so I'll pick the price up. But if I take that production order and I just click on that, I can either create everything, I can modify quantities. If I don't like the quantity, I can change it. So I can make that 7 instead of 6. If I click on that, and I'll just do the one production order. So that's the make, that's the dates to be released, that's the date it's due. Now because that's in a very short manufacturing time, it's the same day, but if I update that, that'll give me one new production order was created. Obviously if I ticked all the boxes, I would have got various purchase orders and purchase requests and 2 production orders. And if I OK that, if I then go to production order, and I go to the last record, that's the one I've just raised. So there's the quantity of 7 and there's the dates. Okay. The order date is the date I placed the order, so that's today's date. That's the date I need it manufactured by. Okay. And a lot of these then, if I go into production reports and look at the open items list and I change that to production orders, that will give me all the production orders that have been raised, and that's the one there, 189 over the one I've just created. Okay, so it's there for the quantity of 7. So basically the open items list for production orders, you can sort that by product number, you can change the layout and settings of these things. So if you want to use that as a work to list, you can do that. There's also other reports which will give you the loading by resource and so on. So once it's produced, the last stage is really to do a receipt from production, and that will put the stock back into stock, and then from there it goes back into the sales cycle again, and we dispatch that against the sales order. Now obviously if you're running batch or serial tracking, when you book stock in from a production order or from a purchase order, you have to quote the batch numbers and the serial numbers. When you dispatch it against the sales order, you have to say which serial number or which batch number you're dispatching. So at any point in time you can go back and do full batch traceability from a sales dispatch back to the production order, from production order to the materials used to make it and the dates it was made and the suppliers of that material. So if you're running AQAP or ISO quality standards with batch traceability, you know, that's all handled within standard SAP. Okay, it's now nearly 3 o'clock and I was supposed to take half an hour, so I suppose I better shut up. So the next thing is I was going to hand you back to Ian and see if there's any questions that you want me to pick up on.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Clive. That was a really interesting demonstration.
Yeah, I'm sorry it was a bit disjointed, but it's our internet connection here. It's a bit sort of, it's not very good sometimes, and I've actually been working on it recently, so it seems to drop out occasionally. And of course, as soon as it does that, all the GoToMeeting stuff just disappears.
Yeah, no worries. So I think that we do still have some attendees on the call. So as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, if you do have any questions or any queries about SAP Business One, there is a questions tab where you can send those through to Clive, and I'll obviously relay those to him. And hopefully, if there are any, you know, we can answer those on the call now. Okay, Clive, we've got a question from Stephen. Stephen asks, how does the production module capture direct labour costs on a production line?
Right, what you do is you set the labour up as basically a resource, okay? And then you make it a manual issue. So when you do the material issue, you actually say you've issued X amount of actual labour to the job. Now, it knows what the standard labour should be from the bill of material. So if you issue or you book more labour to the job than the standard, it'll calculate an adverse variance on the production order. Ian, can you still see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Right. If I go to a production order and I just pick, so I'll have to move this out of the way. So I'll just pick a production order. Right. Okay. If I go to the summary tab, no, that's not a very good one. I'll go back to one that's maybe got some completions against it. Yeah. There, for example, is I've got the actual item component cost. So that's what's actually been issued. I've got the actual resource component. So that's all labour I should have booked to it. And then what I'll get down here is any actual additional costs, because on a bill of material, an item could be a labour item, or it could be, it could be a labour resource, but you could also have what we call a non-production item, which would be like an overhead cost, and it will be backflushed normally. Then you've got an actual product cost. That total variance is any of the variance in material and labour. And if you look at the components, that gives you a breakdown of what's actually been booked. So there's your planned quantity, your issued quantity. That's the available capacity. That's not really relevant from the booking point of view, but you see the base quantity was 4.5 hours, the planned was 4.5 hours, the issued was 4.5 hours, so that's why there's no variance on there. But if that issued was 5 hours, that's where it would calculate a variance, and that's how you get the actual costs against the job. Now, if you're really interested in that, we have an add-on called B1 Apps, which contains a shop floor data collection system, and it is designed to be done through shop floor terminals as opposed to through a sort of stock type transaction screen in SAP. So it runs as an independent piece of software which is accredited by SAP, and it updates the SAP database, but it's geared to being used on the shop floor. So the shop floor users don't actually need a full SAP license. They just need a license to use their app. And I've got a couple of customers who are now actually running it not on a terminal or a PC as such. They're actually using a Wi-Fi in the factory to use it via a tablet. So there's quite a lot of options in that, but my brief today was to show you standard SAP rather than try and sell our add-on. So I hope that helps. Does that make sense?
Okay, reply from Stephen. Yes, it does. Thanks a lot. Okay, thanks, Stephen.
No, that's fine. Good, good.
Okay, Clive. That looks like that's the end of the questions now.
Right, okay, that's fine.
Thank you for your presentation. Apologies again for the technical issues that we had halfway through with the meeting software. Like Clive explained, by the sounds of it, his internet went down, so that just crashed the software. But you know, thanks a lot for everyone who stayed on the line. We will send out a recording of the video again, and if you would like to find out any further information about SAP Business One or Milner Browne, you can go onto our website, which is www.milnerbrowne.com. That's Browne with an E, so Milner Browne, BROWNE.com. And there you can find various sections on SAP Business One. You can see some of the manufacturing sub-industries that we specialise in. You can read some of our case studies of our customers, etc. And just find out a little bit more about Milner Browne as an organisation and how we help small businesses. Okay, so that just leaves me to thank Clive again for his time this afternoon.
No, my problem, my pleasure.
Excellent, and thank you for your attendance, and hopefully we will speak to you soon. Goodbye.